The Galactic Council believed humanity would bow one last time. They were wrong. Long before the first alarms echoed through the chambers of power, before fleets ignited their engines and diplomats abandoned their seats, a silence settled over the galaxy that no one could explain. It was the kind of silence that arrives before a supernova, before a storm tears apart an ocean, before history decides to change forever. Across thousands of inhabited systems, billions of citizens paused to watch a live transmission from the Orion Assembly, the oldest and most powerful political institution ever created. Suspended within a colossal sphere of transparent crystal orbiting a dying blue giant, the council chamber shimmered like a miniature universe. Rivers of light flowed beneath polished floors. Massive banners representing thousands of civilizations drifted weightlessly beneath the vaulted dome, while stars burned beyond the glass like silent witnesses. Every seat was occupied. Every species had come to witness the moment the youngest member of the galactic community would finally be broken. At the center of the chamber stood the human delegation. They looked painfully ordinary compared to the towering insectoid generals clad in living armor, the crystalline elders whose bodies glowed with ancient energy, and the colossal reptilian governors wrapped in ceremonial metals mined from collapsed stars. Humanity wore simple dark uniforms marked only by a silver emblem of Earth. No extravagant decorations. No displays of wealth. No visible weapons. Their faces remained calm, almost unreadable, but behind every steady expression lived decades of betrayal, sacrifice, and impossible restraint. Ambassador Nathan Hale stood motionless at the front of the delegation, his hands folded behind his back, his eyes fixed not on the council members surrounding him, but on the distant stars beyond the chamber walls. Somewhere beyond those lights was Earth, the world that had spent generations defending trade routes, rescuing alien colonies from extinction, rebuilding shattered economies, and honoring every treaty it had ever signed. Yet none of that mattered today. The ancient speaker of the council slowly rose from an immense obsidian throne carved before humanity had even discovered fire. His voice echoed through the chamber with mechanical precision as countless translation systems carried his words into every known language simultaneously. One by one, the accusations filled the air. Humanity had refused mandatory military oversight. Humanity had rejected forced technological inspections. Humanity had refused to surrender control of its colonies to council administration. Each charge was spoken as though it were an unforgivable crime rather than the defense of basic sovereignty. Around the circular chamber, delegates nodded in satisfaction. Some whispered with amusement. Others smiled openly. They believed they were witnessing the final lesson for an ambitious young civilization that had forgotten its place. Then came the verdict. A massive ceremonial gavel forged from the core of a neutron star descended toward the obsidian platform. The impact thundered through the assembly. The vibration traveled into the walls, through the transparent dome, and out into space itself, where communication relays instantly carried the decision across millions of light years. Earth was stripped of its voting rights. Human fleets were ordered to surrender under council supervision. Outer colonies would be redistributed among neighboring powers. Any resistance would be considered an act of rebellion against galactic law. Gasps spread through civilian audiences watching from distant worlds. Some celebrated. Others watched in uneasy silence. Even among species loyal to the council, a few began to wonder if something irreversible had just happened. But the human delegation did not argue. They did not plead. They did not shout. For several endless seconds, no one moved. Then Ambassador Hale calmly reached to his chest and unclipped the silver diplomatic insignia from his uniform. The tiny emblem struck the polished floor with a sharp metallic click that somehow sounded louder than the speaker's gavel. One by one, every human representative did the same. Without exchanging a single word, they turned their backs on the council and walked toward the enormous exit doors. Their footsteps echoed slowly across the chamber until even the laughter stopped. Some delegates smirked, believing they had witnessed defeat. Others felt something colder than fear settle deep within them. Because every experienced commander in the galaxy knew one truth. The most dangerous enemy is never the one who shouts before a war. It is the one who walks away in absolute silence. Far beyond the glittering towers of the Galactic Council, where the influence of politics faded into endless darkness, a region of space known as the Veil of Ashes drifted unseen by almost every star chart in the galaxy. Dense clouds of ionized dust swallowed light itself, turning entire solar systems into invisible ghosts. Ancient wrecks floated silently through the crimson mist, remnants of forgotten wars that had been erased from history long before humanity ever reached the stars. To most civilizations, the Veil was cursed, a place where sensors failed, navigation collapsed, and fleets simply disappeared. To humanity, it was sanctuary. Hidden within its impenetrable embrace rested the greatest secret ever constructed by human hands. The colossal battleship Aegis Eternal emerged slowly from the swirling nebula like a mountain rising from an endless ocean of fire. Nearly 30 kilometers long, its armored hull bore the scars of decades spent hidden rather than celebrated. Gigantic hangar bays stretched across its flanks, while thousands of defense cannons rested beneath armored plating that reflected almost no light. Entire forests, residential districts, hospitals, and manufacturing sectors existed within the ship's immense interior, making it less a vessel than a self-contained civilization. Quiet engine vibrations pulsed through its metal bones like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant waiting for the moment it would finally awaken. On the command bridge, Admiral Elena Ward stood motionless before an enormous panoramic viewport overlooking the endless crimson clouds beyond. The Council's live verdict still hovered above the tactical table as a holographic recording, replaying the final moments again and again. She watched Ambassador Nathan Hale remove his diplomatic insignia in complete silence before walking away from the assembly. Around her, hundreds of officers remained equally silent. No one cursed. No one demanded revenge. Every face reflected the same restrained expression, the expression of people who had expected this outcome long before the Council had ever spoken its judgment. Elena slowly closed her eyes. She remembered another time. Decades earlier, as a young naval officer, she had escorted humanitarian convoys into systems devastated by war. Human engineers rebuilt alien cities without asking for territory. Human doctors cured diseases that had plagued entire species for centuries. Human fleets defended trade lanes belonging to civilizations that barely acknowledged their existence. Again and again, Earth had chosen cooperation over conquest, believing that trust could be earned through action rather than fear. Yet every sacrifice had been catalogued by the Council not as strength, but as weakness. Every compromise had invited another demand. Every act of mercy had convinced the powerful that humanity would endure anything rather than fight. A quiet chime interrupted her thoughts. One by one, encrypted status reports began appearing across the bridge. Deep beneath Earth's oceans, sealed military vaults unlocked for the first time in over a century. Hidden shipyards carved into hollowed asteroids powered on beneath layers of artificial rock. Orbital construction platforms that had masqueraded as civilian infrastructure suddenly shifted into combat configuration. Fusion reactors buried beneath Antarctic ice awakened with thunderous pulses that shook entire mountain ranges. Across dozens of classified colonies, lights flickered on inside facilities that officially did not exist. No panic. No chaos. Only preparation. A young communications officer looked toward the Admiral, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "Ma'am, confirmation from all sectors. Protocol judgment is standing by." The bridge fell even quieter. Elena looked once more toward the crimson nebula outside the viewport. Somewhere beyond that darkness, billions of ordinary human families continued their daily lives, unaware that history had crossed a line from which there would be no return. Children still laughed in city parks beneath Earth's blue skies. Farmers harvested crops on distant colony worlds. Scientists continued experiments aboard research stations orbiting unfamiliar suns. They had all believed diplomacy would protect the future. Now that burden rested elsewhere. The admiral inhaled slowly before placing her hand against the command console. Transmit authorization. The officer hesitated for only a heartbeat. To whom, Admiral? Elena's eyes never left the stars. Everyone. A single encrypted signal burst silently into hyperspace. It carried only 4 words. Protocol judgment is active. Across humanity's hidden empire, sleeping giants opened their eyes. The first sign that something had gone terribly wrong was not an explosion. It was an absence. Across the sprawling web of hyperspace routes that connected thousands of civilizations, human trade convoys simply ceased to exist. Cargo ships that had faithfully delivered medicine, food, and industrial materials for generations never arrived at their scheduled destinations. Embassies that had stood proudly in foreign capitals for centuries were found abandoned, their lights dimmed, their halls immaculate, every terminal wiped clean as though no one had ever lived there. Diplomatic channels that once buzzed with constant communication fell silent one after another until entire sectors of the galactic network echoed with empty frequencies. At first, the Council dismissed the disappearances as symbolic protest. But as the hours stretched into days, even veteran intelligence analysts began to realize they were witnessing something far more calculated. Humanity was not retreating. Humanity was vanishing by design. Panic spread slowly at first, then all at once. Emergency sessions erupted inside the Orion Assembly as frightened delegates demanded answers that no one could provide. Surveillance arrays positioned around the Sol system suddenly stopped transmitting. Orbital monitoring stations simply blinked off the network without broadcasting distress signals. Deep space reconnaissance drones approached Earth's borders only to lose all contact moments later, swallowed by invisible interference that left behind nothing except static. Entire reconnaissance fleets reported impossible sensor readings, ghost contacts appearing and disappearing across millions of kilometers, gravitational signatures fluctuating without explanation, and energy spikes that defied every known law of physics. Every report contradicted the last, creating a storm of confusion that only deepened the growing fear. Inside the Council's Central Intelligence Directorate, walls of holographic displays flooded the command center with crimson warning lights. Analysts rushed between projection tables, comparing streams of fragmented data collected from every corner of known space. A senior intelligence officer stared in disbelief as fresh reports continued to arrive. "We've lost visual confirmation on every classified observation platform surrounding the Sol system," she said quietly. "Not damaged, not destroyed, simply gone." Around her, no one spoke. The silence carried more weight than the alarms themselves. Then came another report. Massive industrial activity had been detected within asteroid belts previously catalogued as inactive. Moments later, those readings vanished. Long-range telescopes briefly captured the outline of an enormous metallic structure before it disappeared behind perfectly synchronized camouflage fields. Minutes later, dozens more identical signatures appeared across entirely different sectors. Then they vanished as well. No civilization possessed stealth technology on that scale. At least, that was what everyone had believed. Far beyond the Council's reach, hidden facilities awakened with relentless precision. Asteroid mining colonies unfolded like mechanical flowers, revealing shipyards concealed beneath centuries of engineered rock. Civilian manufacturing stations quietly rerouted assembly lines from commercial production to military construction in less than an hour. Automated drones that had spent decades building infrastructure now assembled armor plating, reactor cores, and advanced propulsion systems at astonishing speed. Nothing was rushed. Nothing felt desperate. Every movement followed a timetable written long before the Council had delivered its verdict. That realization chilled even the most experienced strategists. This wasn't revenge born from anger. It was preparation reaching its final stage. Emergency fleets were ordered toward Earth's borders, but hyperspace commanders found navigation corridors mysteriously collapsing before their arrival. Communication relays experienced unexplained interference. Supply routes failed. Even advanced artificial intelligences struggled to predict human movements because there were no movements to predict. Humanity refused to respond to threats, refused to issue declarations, refused to broadcast demands. The silence itself became a weapon more terrifying than any fleet. Within the council chambers, arguments replaced confidence. Delegates who had applauded Earth's punishment only hours earlier now shouted over one another, accusing rival governments of withholding intelligence. Military leaders demanded immediate mobilization while politicians insisted humanity was bluffing. Ancient alliances began fracturing under the pressure of uncertainty. Every decision was delayed by fear of making the wrong move. Then the final intelligence packet arrived. Hidden across dozens of supposedly lifeless systems, thousands of human warships had simultaneously emerged from beneath planetary crusts, inside hollow moons, and within camouflaged asteroid fortresses. Some vessels were larger than entire cities. Others carried weapons whose energy signatures had never appeared in any council database. Every fleet moved with flawless coordination, yet none advanced toward hostile territory. They simply waited. Watching. Prepared. And for the first time in centuries, the rulers of the galaxy understood the terrible truth they had spent generations ignoring. They had measured humanity only by the piece it chose to show the universe. They had never imagined what humanity had chosen to keep hidden. No one expected the truth to arrive as a whisper. There was no dramatic declaration, no triumphant broadcast, no fleet descending from hyperspace to announce humanity's intentions. Instead, the revelation unfolded quietly, one impossible discovery at a time, until the foundation of the Galactic Council's power began to crumble beneath its own weight. In secure command bunkers buried beneath the Orion Assembly, emergency analysts stared at streams of encrypted data that made no sense. Defense grids were disconnecting from central command without suffering a single attack. Long-range sensor arrays were rejecting Council authorization codes. Autonomous security satellites were entering standby mode on their own. At first, officials blamed sabotage. Then software corruption. Then enemy infiltration. But every explanation collapsed under the same terrifying conclusion. Nothing had been hacked. Nothing had been damaged. The systems were behaving exactly as they had been designed to behave. Deep inside the hidden command center aboard the Aegis Eternal, Admiral Elena Ward stood before a circular holographic map that displayed the entire galaxy in shimmering blue light. Thousands of icons pulsed across the projection, each representing a dormant defense platform, relay station, shipyard, or strategic installation. Around her, senior commanders watched silently as encrypted confirmations arrived one after another. Entire sectors were reporting successful synchronization. Every hidden ally was in position. Every contingency had survived decades of secrecy. Elena felt neither satisfaction nor triumph. Only a heavy sadness. She had spent her entire career hoping this day would never come. Every classified operation, every concealed construction project, every impossible engineering achievement had existed for one reason alone, to ensure humanity would never be caught unprepared if peace failed. She reached toward the command console. Execute Phase 2. The order was spoken so softly that it barely carried across the bridge. Yet its consequences echoed across the stars. Within seconds, dormant transmitters hidden inside hundreds of Council communication hubs awakened simultaneously. Quantum encryption keys that had remained untouched for generations unlocked files sealed before most modern civilizations even existed. Around the galaxy, forgotten machines quietly accepted new instructions, not because they had been seized, but because humanity had always possessed the authority to issue them. The realization spread through the Council like wildfire. Centuries earlier, during the reconstruction that followed the Great Stellar Collapse, humanity's engineers had answered the Council's desperate call for help. Human architects had rebuilt hyperspace relay networks. Human programmers had written the operating frameworks for planetary defense systems. Human scientists had stabilized energy grids that countless civilizations still depended upon. They had asked for no recognition, no ownership, only cooperation. Quietly, almost invisibly, they had embedded dormant constitutional safeguards into every major system, fail-safe protocols designed to activate only if the Council itself violated the charter it had sworn to uphold. The Council had never noticed. It had never even looked. Because it had never imagined the younger species could think so far ahead. Across dozens of star systems, enormous orbital defense stations rotated away from human space and instead locked onto aggressive Council battle groups preparing for invasion. Military shipyards refused unauthorized launch commands. Strategic weapon arrays powered down moments before firing solutions could be completed. Navigation beacons rerouted entire armadas away from civilian population centers without human pilots touching a single control panel. Chaos erupted. Council admirals shouted conflicting orders across collapsing communication networks. Politicians accused one another of treason. Artificial intelligences, built upon the very code humanity had written centuries before, calmly denied commands that violated the founding laws of the Federation. Every emergency override returned the same response. Authorization denied. Charter protection active, ***. Then came the second revelation. Encrypted hyperspace channels, hidden beyond every known military frequency, suddenly lit up across the galaxy. Worlds that the Council had dismissed as insignificant began responding one after another. Border civilizations. Independent colonies. Forgotten protectorates. Refugee systems abandoned during past wars. Species that had quietly endured exploitation while pretending loyalty. They had never been alone. For generations, humanity had forged friendships instead of empires, offering aid without demanding tribute, defending worlds without planting flags, earning trust one act of kindness at a time. Those quiet acts had built something the Council had never measured because it could never be conquered by force. An alliance. Not of fear. Not of obligation. But of choice. As countless allied fleets emerged from hidden jump corridors, their formation lights igniting the darkness like a rising constellation, the balance of power shifted forever. In that breathtaking moment, the rulers of the galaxy understood the greatest mistake they had ever made. They believed humanity had been preparing for war. In truth, humanity had been preparing for the day peace would be betrayed. The war the Galactic Council had feared for centuries finally arrived, but it did not resemble the nightmare they had imagined. There were no burning planets, no indiscriminate bombardments, no rivers of fire sweeping across helpless worlds. Instead, the galaxy witnessed something even more astonishing. Humanity fought with terrifying precision. As dawn broke across countless star systems, hyperspace itself seemed to fracture with ribbons of blue-white light. Thousands of human warships emerged in perfect formation, their arrival so synchronized that distant observers compared it to watching an entire constellation come alive. The immense silhouette of the Aegis Eternal led the advance, gliding silently through the darkness with the confidence of a predator that had never needed to prove its strength. Around it, carrier groups, escort cruisers, autonomous drone swarms, and defense platforms moved with flawless coordination, every maneuver calculated years before this moment had ever become necessary. Inside the flagship's command bridge, Admiral Elena Ward stood before the tactical display as hundreds of battlefronts unfolded simultaneously across the holographic galaxy. Colored markers flashed continuously, yet none represented civilian population centers. Every target had been selected with extraordinary care: command ships, weapons platforms, military shipyards, communications hubs, and strategic logistics routes. Human commanders had one order above all others: protect innocent lives. That principle had survived every secret meeting, every classified contingency, every decade of preparation. Elena understood that history would judge humanity not only by whether it won, but by how it chose to win. The first engagement began above the fortress world of Karen Prime. Council battle cruisers unleashed enormous streams of plasma capable of vaporizing moons, but the attack struck only empty space. Human vessels moved with breathtaking agility, their adaptive engines bending gravitational currents in ways alien physicists believed impossible. Swarms of autonomous drones surrounded hostile flagships, slicing through sensor arrays, disabling shield generators, and severing weapon systems without destroying the ships themselves. Massive electromagnetic pulses rippled across the battlefield, silencing cannons that had terrorized entire sectors for generations. Within minutes, proud armadas that had expected glorious combat found themselves drifting helplessly, engines silent, weapons lifeless, crews staring in disbelief through observation windows at an enemy that refused unnecessary bloodshed. Across dozens of simultaneous battles, the same impossible pattern repeated. Human marines boarded disabled vessels not as executioners but as disciplined peacekeepers, securing reactors before catastrophic failures could occur, evacuating wounded sailors regardless of species, and transmitting medical assistance to crews who had expected only death. Council commanders could not comprehend what they were witnessing. Their military doctrine had always assumed victory required annihilation. Humanity had rewritten the definition of power. Every restrained decision became another psychological blow. Every spared life shattered decades of propaganda that had painted humans as reckless primitives. Finally, the path to the Orion Assembly lay open. The Council's colossal command flagship, protected by the last remaining elite defense fleet, floated above the capital world like a mountain forged from black steel. Its primary weapons slowly rotated toward the approaching human armada before freezing in place. Override protocols activated once more. One by one, targeting systems powered down. Shield arrays collapsed. Escape routes sealed automatically to prevent desperate officers from abandoning their own crews. Silence spread across the flagship as every control console displayed the same unchanging message. Charter authority restored. Unauthorized aggression terminated, ****. Admiral Ward ordered her shuttle forward alone. No escort. No honor guard. No display of triumph. When she entered the council chamber, the same chamber where humanity had been condemned only days before, the once confident delegate sat in absolute silence. The obsidian throne stood empty. Broken ceremonial banners drifted slowly beneath the crystal dome. Faces that had once mocked Earth's restraint now carried only exhaustion and regret. Elena looked around the chamber before speaking. Her voice remained calm. You believed kindness was weakness. The words echoed softly through the vast hall. You believed restraint meant fear. You mistook patience for surrender. Every treaty we honored, every hand we extended, every compromise we accepted, convinced you that humanity lacked the courage to fight. She paused, letting the silence answer for itself. The truth is much simpler. Her eyes met those of every delegate. It takes far greater strength to hold back than it does to strike. No one challenged her. Because beyond the chamber walls, the galaxy had already witnessed the proof. Humanity had won the greatest war in its history. Not by becoming monsters, but by refusing to. When the last weapons finally fell silent, the galaxy did not celebrate with fireworks or victory parades. It stood in stunned silence, as though the stars themselves were trying to comprehend what had just unfolded. For the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council, the institution that had ruled countless civilizations for millennia, had been defeated without being destroyed. The great obsidian banners that once symbolized absolute authority were lowered from the crystal domes of the Orion Assembly, replaced by no conqueror's flag. The massive war fleets that had once enforced obedience drifted peacefully in orbit, their weapons permanently deactivated, their crews returning home under humanity's protection rather than in chains. Across thousands of worlds, billions watched live broadcasts, waiting for the inevitable declaration of a new empire. It never came. Instead, Admiral Elena Ward walked alone through the vast corridors of the Council's central chamber, her footsteps echoing softly beneath towering pillars carved from ancient starlight crystal. The magnificent hall, once filled with arrogant voices and political spectacle, now felt strangely human in its silence. Broken ceremonial seals still lay scattered across the polished floor where corrupt authority had finally collapsed beneath the weight of its own ambition. Elena paused before the empty speaker's throne, resting her hand against the cold black stone. She could almost hear the echoes of the verdict that had condemned Earth only days before. Strange how quickly certainty could become history. Outside the chamber, representatives from hundreds of civilizations slowly gathered, not as prisoners, not as victors, but as equals uncertain of what tomorrow would bring. Some had fought beside humanity. Others had once voted against it. Many lowered their eyes in quiet shame, remembering how easily they had mistaken compassion for weakness. Elena looked across the assembly and saw fear, hope, regret, and exhaustion written on faces from worlds she had spent a lifetime trying to protect. Revenge would have been easy. It always was. Building something better would demand far greater courage. One by one, humanity's hidden allies entered the chamber. Border worlds once abandoned by the Council. Refugee civilizations rescued decades earlier by anonymous human relief fleets. Independent colonies that had survived only because Earth had quietly shared food, medicine, engineers, and defense technology without asking for tribute. None of them stood there because they had been conquered. They stood there because someone had chosen kindness when power would have demanded obedience. That realization spread through the hall more powerfully than any speech ever could. Humanity's greatest weapon had never been its fleets or its secret defenses. It had been trust patiently earned across generations. The old council was dissolved that very day. In its place, delegates drafted the first articles of a new interstellar federation where no civilization, no matter how ancient or powerful, could place itself above the laws it created. Military authority would answer to shared oversight. Smaller worlds would possess voices equal to larger empires. Human engineers helped rebuild communication networks they had once been forced to disable, while doctors treated wounded soldiers from every side without asking which flag they had served. The galaxy slowly learned that justice did not require humiliation, and strength did not require domination. Peace, when protected by principle instead of fear, could endure. Years later, children born after the war would visit museums built inside the restored halls of the Orion Assembly. They would stand beneath the preserved diplomatic insignia once worn by Ambassador Nathan Hale, the small silver emblem that had fallen to the floor on the day humanity walked away in silence. Guides would tell them that history did not change because the strongest fleet fired first. It changed because one civilization refused to surrender its values, even when betrayed by those it trusted. And whenever future leaders grew tempted by arrogance or absolute power, they would remember the lesson carved forever into the entrance of the new assembly. Never mistake humanity's patience for weakness. Because when kindness finally reaches its limit, it does not create conquerors. It creates guardians, ***.